Hi, my name is Wojciech Sosnowski and I'm an attorney. Thank you for inviting me to your conference. So today we're going to be talking about your legal relationship with fans. This is a topic that usually is omitted by other lawyers, and even at this conference I attended some other talks that included topics like publishing deals, developing deals, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, one of the main reasons why you create video games is to earn money, and you do so by agreeing with fans that they can use your video game, get familiar with it, and pay to you. So the deal, the contract between you and fans is as important as any other deal that you can make. This is a short agenda. I'll be using some examples from industry, recent examples from industry to give you a better understanding of what I'm talking about. And first of all, I'd like to say also that this is to speak about legal relationship in IP law and consumers law. It's still a very new thing. You won't find many articles or advice on this topic. It somehow flies under the radar, but it's truly important. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you with the details, like the detailed history. I just like to point out that that's my thought, that humanity in general is fan-based. I mean, we observe during the periods of history that people just join groups, fan groups, they consume art in perhaps different ways. But the second half of 20th century gave birth to the true fandom as we speak today. So very passionate people who are eager to consume your products, your video games. And who are they, right? Who are the fans? So basically, also I'm not going to get into too many details, sociological details, but I'd like to point out that it's very well, there are many writings about fan groups, especially in Poland. And in general, fans are people who go an extra step in consuming your product. They spend more money, typically. They spend more time and effort to get familiar with your video game. We can divide fans into three categories. The casual fans, they still consider themselves fans because they do spend more money and time, but they don't create. They don't get involved with fandom. Pro-ama fans are people who start earning on their creations based on your video games, and usually their income is up to 50% of what they earn every day. So basically they have a day job, and after hours they create some pieces of art based on video games, for instance, and they monetize them. And we also have something called pro fans. Pro fans are people who turned being a fan into a job. Basically, that's every streamer who has a full-time job streaming on Twitch, or a YouTuber, or a cosplayer who's a professional conference attender. And just to give you a little insight, I'd highly suggest you get familiar with these three scholars who write about fan groups, and often they criticize industry standards considering fan groups and fan and how the fans interact with the industry, video game industry. Especially Mr. Sotama from Finland, I believe. He's a heavy critic of modding scene, and that's quite a unique approach to the topic. Just to also give you an insight on how much time and effort is put into fan creations, This study has shown that there are people who spend even more than 20 hours a week on modding The Sims. It's quite an dated study from 2006, but nevertheless, imagine that there are people who have a day job, like 40 hours a week, and then they put more than 20 hours into modding your game. This is actually also can be presented as dollar value. Their time can be presented as dollar value. We all have heard probably the story of porting Dark Souls to the PC. And it was, to say the least, it was rushed, but it was saved actually by a fan who patched the game and made the port bearable and playable on PC. And there are some studies, and well, you have to take them with a grain of salt, that point out that fans also solve each other's problems, and they can be a good community, can solve more problems than paid staff. And even, well, if you believe this, because I highly doubt that this number is accurate, because it sounds really high. But, well, the methodology might be, the answer to this number might be in the methodology. But also, we can put a dollar value on how much fans are creating. So, for instance, Battlefield 1942 fans over the 2 years generated $16.5 million content value in content. So, a pretty big sum. Now I'm going to be using some examples to convey what I am going to talk in specifics. So we all probably, I'm just going to give a short story about Warcraft Reforged. It was last year, Blizzard launched the game, tried to, well, it was actually a remake, right? It was a full remake of a classic RTS strategy game. And it was riddled with many bugs. It was also underdeveloped. And the main reason why I'm talking about it is because they have made a substantial change in their stance towards fan-made objects. So Blizzard's IP policy actually consists of two legal documents. The first one is called Blizzard End User License Agreement, which is a pretty standard agreement and pretty standard name for an agreement. But also, they have created in January 2021 a separate document called Custom Game Acceptable Use Policy, which is a document that governs only creation and usage of custom game modes, maps, and other sort of creations that are made in built-in editor. What is important to understand is that these documents should be read not separately, but together. They are interjected. However, Custom Games Accepted Use Policy supersedes Blizzard's end user license. So this is something quite unusual. So let's, for instance, imagine that there is some sort of collision between these two documents. So we should resolve this collision by reading first and applying rules that are established in Custom Game Accepted Use Policy. And from my point of view as a lawyer, this is the first problem, right? So you want to make your relationship with fans as clear as it is possible. So creating multitude of documents is not something that is consumer friendly. The consumer is not a lawyer. Typical consumer is not a lawyer, and is not able to perhaps go through the wall of text and more documents that you create. I was disadvised to use this slide. I'm not encouraging you to read it thoroughly, but I want to show you that, again, what I'm talking about is being user-friendly when it comes to creating a license. So imagine being a consumer like you are all probably of video games, and nobody reads this. It's unreadable, right? The way it's given to a simple consumer, average consumer, is unreadable. I read this because I had to, actually. But average consumer doesn't read it. So this is again my point. If you are writing your licensing agreement and you're creating it, please try to use reader-friendly techniques. Don't use small letters, or don't attack with a wall of text. It boils down to 3 categories, because what Blizzard did is they asked the consumer to grant them a reverse license for every custom game creation. In fact, they tell the consumer that if you create something with our game editor, you must grant us a reverse license. We are entitled to have this license, to be a part of this license. And they also made a list of things that they consider that they want a license for. And these things can be grouped in 3 categories. And the first one is in the green rectangle. It's because it's in green because Blizzard basically can ask for this. For these, so any elements that are creative, like models, textures, character texts, creation sheets, or whatever is creative, whatever is somewhat tangible and covered by copyright law, they can ask for a license for it. Any sort of video game, audiovisual material also is covered. When it comes to a gray area, so what Blizzard may or may get a license from a consumer, there are several things that are probably not so easily covered by a simple license. So trademarks, for instance. If under Polish jurisdiction, if you want to transfer right to a trademark, you have to go through a special procedure. It's not so easy. It's not like you can write agreement in a licensing deal and ask for trademark. Trade names and character names. We don't even know in copyright law if character names are copyrightable at all. Some scholars claim that names, very original names, like, I don't know, Jaina Proudmore, right? That's an unusual name, something clearly made out of, from a fictional world. But if the character is called, I don't know, Ethan Carter, for instance, I'm not sure if this is protected by copyright, because it's a quite common combination of names. Also, names and phrases associated with or included with the custom games. And I know what they are going for. They're going for claiming that you can copyright or get copyrighted catchphrases, like the catchphrases that characters say, for instance, in Dota. But because this is maybe a side note, the changes they made are done because they are still sore over the Dota case, you know? They let slip their fingers the Dota modification, and they got into heavy trademark battle with Riot Games and Valve after this, and they're still sore. So they try to prevent any further game modification from slipping from their hands, or any other catchy character that might be created. When it comes to a red zone, which means that they cannot, under any circumstances, ask for a license, is intellectual property rights containing with the custom games, including and all content game concepts. And this is a huge legal battle now. Game concepts, you could describe them perhaps maybe more as a genres, right? So genre like MOBA, genre like Battle Royale. These are game concepts and game concepts that cannot be actually copyrighted, methods or ideas. And I know probably you have heard that in the United States there were cases in which people actually obtain a patent for a procedure or a method. For instance, in one of the Tolkien Mordor games, there's this system of orcs who were promoted, right? Something like this. Warner Media got a patent for this system. But it's the United States, it's a different system, legal system, and it has its own problems. So this is again an excerpt, this time from Custom Games Acceptable Use Policy. And again, they attack the consumer with wall of text that is really hard to read. And for a trained eye, perhaps it's easy to read, but not for a simple consumer. And again, it boils down to 3 steps. So the license that actually Blizzard built is built as a waterfall. It's so-called a cascade license. What they did is, in the first place, they claim that they are sole owners of every content that a fan creates. So they claim that whatever you as a fan create, it's theirs. That's just a simple statement, right? Custom games are and shall remain the sole and exclusive property of Blizzard, the property. So they claim as if they created the game mode. What's happening then in the next step? Obviously, Blizzard lawyers are smarter than this, and they know that some provisions are unenforceable in many jurisdictions. So they included a next step. If this doesn't work in court, for instance, you transfer all the copyright. You transfer all the copyright. So this is the most powerful tool. Transferring the rights to a copyrighted material is a definitive way of getting rid of your copyright. It's very simple. It's similar to selling, for instance, a property or a house, right? So transferring rights. Under some jurisdictions, including Polish, transferring rights has to be done in a specific way. It has to be written down on a physical piece of paper. You cannot transfer rights when it comes to electronic form of documentation. So again, Blizzard lawyers are smarter than this, and they include then a next step. If for any reason, mainly that some jurisdictions disallow such operation in electronic way, you grant the Blizzard perpetual, worldwide, irrevocable, so on and so forth, very broad license for anything exclusive. That's perhaps the most important thing in this agreement, that it's exclusive agreement. So to sum it up, a consumer creates in a game editor, map editor, a custom game. And because Blizzard is kind of greedy, they definitely want to have a piece of the cake, and they definitely want to take anything they can put their hand on. So what's the future? What holds the future? Because there is a lot of debate about such clauses, whether they are about what can be copyrighted, what they want, or how they want it. And recently, European Commission as well as European Parliament got really interested in the area of video game development, and they ordered a study done in Utrecht, Holland. Utrecht is in the Netherlands, actually. And the scope of the study was to analyze the area of cyberspace in general, the internet cyberspace, and how do companies interact with consumers in this area. And one of the part of this study pertained to licenses granted by fans. And the scholars who were involved, first of all, they pointed out that it's unfair. And it's clearly unfair that a fan who creates something is granting a very wide license to the business. Because often, more than often, the consumer doesn't know that there is a huge potential in his game, right? Again, think about Dota. Nobody thought that Dota is going to explode on such scale back in the, 2010, I guess, when it was created as a map mode to Warcraft 3. So in the future, and this is just a study, and I highly recommend you getting familiar with it if you're in the legal space, because you can almost get a whiff of wind what's going to happen next. Because, in my opinion, we are going to see the era of paid mods getting back. How so? Because I guess that one of the reasons the European Commission and European Parliament wanted to order such a study is to bring back a balance between consumer and business. And one of the ways of bringing back the balance is bringing also the monetary balance. Because if a consumer grants a license that is free of charge and he doesn't earn any money from his creation, this is a clearly unbalanced situation. So we might see in the future, I'm not saying like in a year or two, but perhaps 5 to 10 years, some shifts in the understanding of role of a fan and fan creations in copyright and consumer law. And we might get back to the discussion of fans being paid for their creations by companies who wish to use their and profit from their creations. This debate, it resurfaces very often. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mr. Alex Hutchison, Senior Creative Director at Google Stadia, and he's a co-founder of Typhoon Studios. He recently, a few months ago, he tweeted that Twitch streamers supposed to be paying video game creators for streaming video games, and obviously he caught a lot of heat from it. And quickly tried to retract his words. But there is something in it that also the fact that the fans are using your video games and your creations are profiting from it, and yes, they are giving you free publicity and so on. But I guess that why video game industry? Why we can see, for instance, on Twitch, people who are watching Netflix or HBO, it's the same situation. But Netflix or HBO would never allow streamers to watch their films online with a wider audience. Now I will try to show you two ways that you can regulate your relationship with consumers, with fans. And two different ways, using two examples. These companies are not based, not creating video games, but yet they still have a policy, and I think that's in place, and they utilize legal meanings to regulate their relationship with fans. And one of these companies recently caught some major backfire from the changes, namely Game Workshop. So Game Workshop has a very interesting policy. So they decided to create a guide for fans to create, how to create based on Game Workshop's IP. Game Workshop decided that they need to spruce up their legal surroundings. And a few months ago, they decided to make some major changes. They tolerated some fan creations for a long time, and they decided that it's enough is enough. When it comes to their policy, I must say that I'm quite impressed because they managed to use, to avoid the mistakes that I said previously. So mainly they used simple and plain language, a language that is understandable for a consumer. What they did was they divided their policy into three categories, and mainly they they outlined what is allowed and what is disallowed. And you must also understand that this is not a licensing agreement. This is not any sort of agreement. This is a simple statement by the company that they are going to enforce law to a certain extent. When it comes, what strikes me the most is that most of the creations that they allow are to be used only for non-commercial purpose. So fans cannot monetize their creations anyway. Like they cannot even use AdSense program, which is indirect way of monetizing content. So obviously you can't sell any content, but also any method of indirect monetization is also excluded. They also listed a list of no-go or zero-tolerance policy of actions that they consider to be definitely bad for the company and that they disallow. And something that strikes me the most is fan films and animations. They disallow at all creating fan films and animations. And it is my understanding that Game Workshop had a huge following in this area. There were several very prominent creators, mainly from Korea, I guess, who created a lot of content-based fan animations based on this IP, mainly Warhammer 40K. And they disallowed it at all. And because of this, they caught some major fire. This was a huge deal in the community, in the fan base of Warhammer. Not only, but a lot of other companies started to comment on this policy. So this is also something that we can learn from. If you try to change something in your own policy, or you have a policy in place, or you set up a policy, it would be advisable perhaps to use a method called boiling the frog, I guess, to make the changes gradually, not to hit the community with huge changes in your stance. Or actually maybe hire somebody from the PR department who will soften up the message. Because basically what they did is they just put it on the website and said, hey, these are the rules now, obey them or else. When it comes to Wizards of the Coast, they did something absolutely different. Wizards of the Coast, publisher of Dungeons and Dragons and many more tabletop RPG systems, what they did is actually quite clever. They made OGL license, which is a license, a binding agreement that allows you to use a certain content. And the whole agreement is 400 pages long. And it lists every piece of content of Wizards of the Coast's intellectual property that you can use. Mainly you can use game mechanics, which are uncopyrightable, but they still allow you to use it. But also this license works a little bit like new Linux license, because all derivative works also must be released on the same license. So their approach was very different. They made a binding agreement between parties. And also, the difference is that heavy legal language was used, right? The document is really, really hard to read. So a good example of a company that actually put some thought into their policy is Paradox. Paradox has a very interesting policy considering fan-made works. First of all, they encourage fans to create. Many Paradox games are based on fan creations, well, namely City Skylines, right? A game that thrives through creations of fans, buildings, interjections, street interjections. I saw even, wiki page about how to create interjection that will slow down traffic in your city, or not slow down, but make your traffic in your city faster. So Paradox actually mixed up a little bit these two methods. They included the things that they want and don't want into the binding agreement. So they said, hey, this is an agreement between us. This is what you can do. Please read this agreement. And what they also did is they gave the consumer a spreadsheet, like written in a very plain language, what they want to do, what they want to be affiliated with, or what they don't want to be affiliated with. And what's pretty cool is that they also named what this part is quite important, that they disallow a general group of fun creations considering pertaining to tobacco or tobacco-related products and firearms. I guess that is simply their policy not to promote or get even affiliated with tobacco products. They also allow the community to monetize their creations, but they ask for royalty-free, non-exclusive, perpetual, and so forth license for the creations. This is because they have to have this license to distribute some mods. I know that they have been working with prominent modders, and they distribute and compensate prominent modders for their creations. And this is just something I want to talk very briefly about because it's very hard legal topic. Many licensing agreements have a jurisdiction and forum law clauses. What this basically means, and this is from your point of view as a developer or publisher, quite important. What this basically means is that in an agreement you can choose which law will be applicable to this agreement and which courts from which country will conduct proceedings should a case or should a disagreement arise from this licensing agreement. And when it comes to consumer business relationship, there are certain rules that are unmovable in place. Particularly when I'm talking about rules that come from these two pieces of legislation. And what I want you to understand today is even if you write a very convenient for you in your licensing agreement, if you write down that you want, I don't know, a court in Poznań, for instance, to be the court that might one day resolve a case that arose from this agreement, this still might not be binding for the consumer because the law, the hard law, prevents us from stripping consumer from the right of suing you in their own country. So this is quite important because we all know that video game distribution nowadays is done worldwide, right? With almost instantaneously. So please be advised to review your jurisdiction on forum choices because in some cases they might not be, might be applicable to certain case. Okay, so here I'm going to talk a little bit about enforcement. So this is the Fonz. I don't know if you are a fan of American sitcoms. He was an extremely popular character in the 50s, and he comes from American sitcom hit series called Happy Days. And he had this very interesting superpower that he always knew had an ability to fix any machine, a car, a jukebox, anything, with a simple hit. Right? And he always used just enough force to obtain his goal. He never used any brutal force and so forth. So my general advice to you, when it comes to enforcement, your rights as a copyright holder, and when you're dealing with fans who perhaps somehow infringe your rights, or, I don't know, they slander the name of your company even. It's not the scope of this talk, but these rules also apply. Just you do not use excess force. Stay cool at all times, right? And the first step, you should assess the infringement. Because let's be realistic. If you put out your game and it's going to be distributed online, even if it's going to be distributed in physical form, it's going to be probably pirated and distributed illegally, and people will still take your game and create something on it, whether they take code, assets, whatever, music. People will still create over your game. The risk of people taking something from you and creating their own creations is pretty high. But no, not all infringements are worth pursuing. Some infringements are so small and the community is so small that it's not a good step, even from the PR perspective, to be pursuing such action. So is it worth of your time? Is it something that you really want to put time and energy? So before you even start, so when you assess and you're, yes, I decided I want to pursue some action, legal action, start softly. Don't use any serious legal threats. Perhaps even get somebody from the community to talk with, put you in non-legal way, put your position in simple words, tell them that, okay, you know, guys, this is something that we don't want to be affiliated with. You create something based on our game and we have certain obligations. You can't be doing this anymore. And I'm not sure how this method is useful, because all those, there are rare occasions, which we'll see in a minute, that we actually can see what's under the legal workings when it comes to dealing with fans. But I guess that most of the times this might be enough to stop some procedures from happening and creations being distributed, especially when we're talking about, for instance, merchandise, right? There is a huge gap, or there is a huge problem of merchandise that's being illegally distributed and created based on video games. So first of all, start softly. If you're talking about, there are pre-trial tools that you can utilize, such as the MCA takedown. This is an American version, of course, but most jurisdictions have something similar, which is basically that you can ask the website or host, cloud host or any space host. You can ask them to take down things that are infringing your copyright. And half of the time, or most of the time, they will budge in and delete this content because they don't want to be eligible for any court actions as well. And the last thing is perhaps a little bit more from the PR department, but there might be some backlash. If you decide to take action and go through with it, there might be some social media backlash, same as in Game Workshop's case. They caught some major fire in social media to the point, I guess, that even their value of their company dropped a little bit, at least. And when it comes to litigation, this is absolute extremity, and if you are like super decided to pursue the community members that infringe of your rights and you really want to get into the court dealings, be prepared that it's going to be an ordeal, a true ordeal, many years of heavy lawyering, and it's not going to end anytime soon. This is a cautionary tale that I want to show you. A very interesting case of being a bad lawyer. I mean, not applying the rules that I have set. The Chrono project was a legacy project that was done by members of highly skilled community members who decided they don't like League of Legends anymore. And they said, we don't like modern League of Legends. We like what was 8 or 10 years ago done. We like the vanilla version. This can be compared to a movement the same as people used to be really crazy about WoW Classic, right? There were multiple servers of WoW Classic, and for some reason people really liked playing WoW Classic. I tried playing WoW Classic, just a side note, the modern version, and I just couldn't bear with all the mechanics, dated mechanics, really. I don't know why. But anyway, so some people decided to reverse League of Legends to the vanilla version without any updates. and the project was the people who involved in the project invested a lot of time, like 5 years of their time was poured into this project. And one day Riot Games decided, no more, you're not allowed to work on this project. And they sent an investigator after the community members. And the community members leaked messages that were exchanged. Lord Lotendran is one of the main developers of the Chrono project. Z is the investigator, and the colorful, the yellowish remarks are mine. So as we can see, they use Discord. They use Discord to pursue the legal action, and it starts quite okay, right? The guy, Z guy, writes that they are not super thrilled. You know, he starts softly. Perhaps you shouldn't be doing this, and you know, you can see the will to discuss matters from the other side, from the community side. And 10 times the community members will know that they are generally disallowed to create something based on video games. The conversation goes on, and it starts to sound really harsh. The Z guy, you know, starts to be really a little bit aggressive. And what happened is that he used puns, right? He wrote, "Chrono break is coming." Something that is so infantile to think about it, to use pun in a serious legal discussion, it's unimaginable. And then he goes straight for the meat from the neck, and he says, if we were scare tactics, Riot wanted you, you wouldn't be speaking to me, right? So, you know, this is or else part. And the community member was not really amused by the tone, and also he changed his own tone, and he asked the Z guy for a time to consult his position with his own attorney. Well, but he was, that investigator was relentless and decided that he's going to pursue the same venue of negotiations. And then he enforced there is no legal strategy, right, that he's basically cornered, so on and so forth. And the end was actually very striking, because even if the negotiations go poorly, you still have to maintain civil stance and be civil and say, hey, okay, our positions are different, have a nice day. But what the Z person did is said, I wish I could say it has been a pleasure. So what a high note to be ending any negotiations. And Riot Games actually caught also major PR fire for this action. Obviously, these pieces of conversation, they traveled through the internet, through Reddit, Twitter, any other platform, YouTube. And Riot was really, I guess that they did something that, well, they broke the Chrono project basically, right? So they decided that they're going to be pursuing shutting down the project at all, but they said that because it's a single member of our staff, and we're investigating this event, so on and so forth. So basically, nobody got hurt. And I'd like to leave you with some tips. If you were, writing your own license, or if you were managing your community legally speaking, I'd highly suggest having at least one document similar to what Game Workshop did. So have a clear policy that includes what is allowed and what is disallowed. This will give the community also sort of sense of security, that they can, and stability. They can create certain content, but certain content cannot be created. Also, something that is not written down here, please be advised to secure a license to stream. It's a very common problem that some musicians disallow video game creators to include their music in if the game is going to be streamed. This was a case, for instance, for Europa Universalis 4. They have a save for stream mode when the music that is they don't have a license for streaming is muted, basically. So please be advised that if you want to run a community that is free to create, secure a license, a broader license, so they can also stream the game with the music. Utilize and harness the power of fans. This is what I'm trying to convey today is not something that you should now quash all creative freedom of fans. The fans, as I stated, are a powerhouse when it comes to your video games, and you can really harness the power for good, for your business, to improve it, to make your business even more successful. When it comes to overreaching in agreements, as I stated, don't be greedy. Don't ask for things that you cannot really copyright or you cannot easily transfer via simple electronic licensing agreement. It's unenforceable, and it's a bad business practice in my anti-consumer. And I'm not the panic guy actually, but also, I'm not sure if you know that the president of UOKiK, which is a regulatory body that is tasked with governing and protecting free market in Poland and consumers' rights, he's heavily interested now in influencer area. And he launched an investigation in the influencer area, whether influencers are including crypto advertisements, whether they are disclosing their relationships with companies clearly. And I suppose, and there is no law that prevents President from UOKiK launching the same type of investigation toward the business of video game creation and distribution. So I suppose, in time, I guess somebody will ask the right question. Are video game creators and distributors asking for too much, perhaps, in the license? I highly disadvise you to use pre-made licenses. I saw licenses being sold in packets, like, that you can buy a legal book and write down your own license. A good licensing agreement also, any deal actually, but perhaps maybe licensing agreement in this case, is like a good suit, like tailored to your needs, actual needs. So if you use a pre-made agreement, you may run into problems that you didn't foresee. For instance, problems with the community creating fan art that you don't want to be affiliated with. If you are a bigger company, you can include also something called screening process. Mainly Sega does so. Sega has a process that if you want to monetize Sega's content, it's applicable to all Sega games, but I know that Total War games especially, you have to go through a screening process. You actually, as a creator, fan creator, Twitch streamer, YouTuber, whatever, you have to ask them for a permission to monetize their content, your content based on their content. So if you are a big company and you can automatize it, or you have a separate department that can do so, you can have a screening process, and you can definitely get a vibe from an influencer, for instance, what's his creating process, what sort of content he's creating, and so on. And last minute remark, something that came up to my mind. If you're building perhaps a distribution platform, or you're building a game that is web-based, then I highly suggest you not hiding somewhere the licensing agreement or any agreement at all. There was a case in Krakow, actually, in which a website was created, a shop, and the jurisdiction was set in, I don't know, I think that it was in Germany. And a consumer from Poland claimed that he was not properly informed about the jurisdiction clause in the agreement, in the selling agreement, because it was hidden somewhere. You couldn't even get to it easily. You had to open like 3 or 4 tabs just to get to the text of it. So on the design level, I highly suggest you include a space for talks with a lawyer that can point out where it would be a good idea to put your licensing agreement. Copyright notes, obviously. These are the sources that I used. So I guess thank you guys for the talk. It's now the questions time. I know I did a really great job of conveying when no questions are needed to ask, but please do. It's the best part of any any speech. Oh, great.
Yeah, I happen to have a question. The cases that you brought to our attention were based in common law, mostly. And I'm simply asking from our more, let's say, continental European point of view, why have you stuck to these particular cases while they are simply from different legal systems?
Yeah, so the problem with video game law, so-called, is that the majority cases and court rulings come from the United States, unfortunately. This is something, actually, I struggled because I wrote a PhD. I wrote a book about derivative works and law based on video games, derivative works based on video games. So I shamelessly plug myself in right now, right? And the problem that it's an excellent question because there are very little cases in Europe in general. But to give you a good case that you can read about, and it strictly pertains to the topic that I was talking about, is the case of, and I do not speak French, so bear with me, Wojciech and Steam versus Steam. The Wojciech is an organization of consumers based in France, and they went to the Grand Tribunal in Paris, and they tried to establish that Steam is breaking consumers' law by preventing people from reselling licenses. The case is very fresh and it's very highly controversial. Unfortunately, it's only available in French. So for those of you who are francophones, reach to it and read about it. But the case was very interesting, and I guess that it's one of the examples of continental cases that are in Europe, that were in Europe. But sadly, as I said, some of the cases, most of the cases that we're talking about are in the United States simply because the history of legal struggle in the United States when it comes to video game area dates back the 70s. Actually, the first case, I guess, was the case of Munchkin versus Pac-Man. This was the first case. There was a Munchkin game and Pac-Man game, and it were basically very similar. And people who made Pac-Man, they claimed that Munchkin is a derivative work. And there was a court ruling. I can't now remember what was the outcome of the case. It was probably something very convoluted. But anyways, yeah, that's the problem. We have very little. In Poland, for instance, Polish jurisdiction, no cases about video games, like civil cases. There are a multitude cases in Poland, for instance, in the criminal law, because video games are considered to be computer programs. And thusly, if you gain unlawful access to computer game, you are falling under the article. Oh, I can't now remember the article, but basically you're stealing the video game, right? So there is a multitude cases concerning, but unfortunately no cases At least I don't know many cases in Europe. That's why I try to. And also, the cases that I used, they were settled out of the court. The case with, for instance, the case between Riot Games, Riot Games, Valve, and Blizzard, when they all were fighting for trademark for Dota, was settled out of the court, I guess. It reached court, but was settled out of the court. But yes, that's really a good question. This is something that we lawyers struggle, because we try to, continental lawyers, we struggle, because we sometimes use American judicial decisions to show something in Europe. And in the back of our heads, there is also the thought that, hey, it's totally different and might not be applicable at all in Poland or in Europe as a whole. Is it sufficient? Thank you. Okay, no questions from the community on Twitch, I guess. So thank you all. If you have any additional questions, you can always contact me. My contact info are here. Feel free to reach at any time. I really like exchanging emails. So thank you very much.